single drop of water leaves the Persian Gulf. It is pulled inland through a steel intake wider than a road tunnel. It moves through pipe and pump and pressure vessel, changing as it goes. And by the time it reaches a tap in a tower 40 kilometers away, it is no longer seawater. It is drinking water, clear, cold, ordinary. There is nothing ordinary about it. Because this drop did not fall from the sky. It did not rise from a spring. It did not run down from a mountain or wait underground for 10,000 years. It was manufactured in a plant the size of a small town, using more energy than some countries spend on almost anything. And it is one of billions, made the same way every single day. This is a desert. Rain here is measured in millimeters, not months. Roughly 100 a year, about 4 inches. In the depth of summer, June, July, August, September, that figure falls to something close to nothing at all. Not low, nothing. Weeks pass, then months. The sky stays white and empty, and the ground gives nothing back. The heat comes with the emptiness. 40 degrees by mid-morning, 48 by afternoon. On the worst days, close to 50. There are no rivers here, no lakes. The old wells that fed the first families turned brackish generations ago, or ran dry, or were quietly paved over and forgotten. And yet, step into this city and water is everywhere. It falls in sheets down the sides of the towers. It fills fountains that dance beneath the tallest building on Earth. It keeps golf courses green in the middle of July. It runs from 10,000 taps in 10,000 kitchens. And it has never, not once, not for a single day, run out. Two things are true at the same time. This is one of the driest inhabited places on the planet, and no one who lives here has ever gone thirsty. Hold both of those in your mind. A desert with no water that never runs out of water. So where does it come from? The answer is not what most people assume. It is not oil. It is not money exactly, though money paid for it. The answer is a machine, an invisible one, stitched together out of seawater, gas, waste heat, and ships. A machine so large it barely fits inside a single story. This is Dubai, and this is how it drinks. Begin where the city began. Not with the towers. They came late. Begin with a narrow scar of seawater cutting a few kilometers inland from the coast. The creek, a tidal inlet, salt water end to end, filling and emptying twice a day with the pull of the Gulf. Nobody settles a place like this for its water. There is no fresh water here to settle for. They settled it for the creek itself. A natural harbor on a coastline that offers almost none. A place to shelter a boat. A place to trade. For most of its history, this was a small town of fishermen and pearl divers. A few thousand people at most. The divers went down on a single breath, again and again, from first light to last, searching the oyster beds of the Gulf for the one thing the world would pay for. The pearls left on wooden boats and came back as rice, as cloth, as dates. Almost nothing they needed was made here. It was all carried in, across the water. That pattern is old, older than the skyline. Long before the first desalination plant, this was already a place that survived by importing what the land could not give. And what the land could not give, above everything else, was water. The first families dug wells. What came up was hard and half salt, drinkable only because there was nothing else. In the hottest months, boats carried barrels of sweeter water down the coast, from wherever it could be found. Water was cargo. Water was hauled and rationed and counted. To be thirsty was normal. To waste a cup was unthinkable. Remember that. A city that now lets water fall in sheets down its towers was built by people who measured it by the barrel. Something changed. Not the rain. The rain never changed. What changed was the machine. 35 kilometers southwest of the towers, the coast turns industrial. The beaches give way to a low forest of steel and concrete that runs for kilometers along the water. Chimneys, cooling stacks, pipe racks, rows of storage tanks. Steam rises from it, day and night. From the road, it could be a refinery, or a port, or a power station.
It is all three at once, and it is the reason the city can exist. This is the Jebel Ali complex. To understand it, you have to hold two facts side by side that seem as if they should belong to two different buildings. It is the largest gas-fired power station in the world, and it is the largest single desalination plant in the world. Those are not two neighbours sharing a fence. They are the same machine. Here is the trick at the very heart of Dubai, the thing almost no one who lives here ever sees. To make fresh water from the sea, the oldest method is also the simplest. You boil it. Seawater goes in, steam comes off. The salt is left behind, and the steam cools back into water so pure it has to be hardened again before a person can safely drink it. But boiling water at the scale of a whole city takes a staggering amount of heat. And right beside the boilers stands a power station, burning gas to spin turbines and make electricity, and throwing off heat as its byproduct. Whole rivers of hot exhaust. In most power stations on Earth, that heat is simply lost, vented to the sky, gone. Here, it is not lost. The heat left over from making electricity is captured and used to boil the sea. One machine, two products. Power and water, made together out of the same fire. Engineers call it cogeneration. It is the closest thing this city has to a natural spring, and it is entirely man-made. The scale is hard to hold in the mind. The complex can turn out well over 2 million cubic metres of fresh water in a single day. Enough to fill hundreds of Olympic pools before lunch. And it runs at better than 99% reliability year after year in heat that would shut most machinery down almost anywhere else on the planet. But look closely at that elegant trick, and you begin to see the thread the whole city hangs from. Because the water is not really made from the sea. The sea is free. The water is made from the heat. And the heat is made from gas, burning without pause every hour of every day. Stop the gas, and the turbines stop. Stop the turbines, and the heat stops. Stop the heat, and the boiling stops. And when the boiling stops, the water stops. In this city, the water is the electricity. They are not two systems that lean on one another. They are one system wearing two faces. A power cut here is not an inconvenience. A power cut here is a drought. Keep that in your pocket. We will come back to it, right at the end, when it matters most. There are, in truth, two ways to pull fresh water from the sea, and the difference between them is quietly reshaping the whole machine. The first is the old way, the boiling. Multi-stage flash, the engineers call it. Seawater is heated until it flashes into steam, in chamber after chamber, each at a lower pressure than the last, so the water boils again and again at falling temperatures. It is simple, it is rugged, and it pairs perfectly with a power station because it feeds on that station's waste heat. For decades, this was how Dubai made almost all of its water. It is the reason the plant and the power station had to be the same building. The water was, quite literally, a byproduct of the electricity. The second way is newer, and it does not boil anything at all. It pushes seawater against a membrane, a barrier so fine that water molecules can be forced through it, while the salt cannot. Reverse osmosis. No steam, no waste heat, only pressure driven by electricity squeezing fresh water out of the sea, one molecule at a time. And that shift changes the thread the city hangs from, without loosening it. Boiling tied the water to heat, and heat to the turbines. Membranes tie the water to raw electricity instead, which means, for the first time, the water no longer has to come from a flame at all. It can come from any power the grid can make. From gas still today, but tomorrow perhaps from the sun. It is a small change in plumbing with an enormous implication. The city that learned to make water by burning gas is learning slowly to make it by pressure and current alone, and in doing so, to prize apart the two things that have always been welded together here: the water and the fire. But prize them apart, and you do not escape the dependency. You only move it. Membranes still need electricity, and a great deal of it. Whether that current comes from a flame or from the sky, the water cannot be made without power. The marriage of water and electricity is not being annulled here. It is only, quietly, being rearranged. Now step outside. In July. The heat does not feel like weather. It feels like a wall. The air sits near 50 degrees and thick with moisture off the Gulf. And within minutes, the body begins to lose a fight it cannot win. Sweat will not cool you, because the air is already too wet to take it. This is not a climate you visit, it is a climate you shelter from. And so the second great system of the city has nothing to do with water. It is about cold. Every tower, every mall, every metro carriage, every bus shelter, every walkway between two buildings, cooled. Not for comfort, for survival. Turn off the cooling in a Dubai summer and the glass towers become furnaces within hours. The city would not merely be unpleasant, it would be uninhabitable. People would have to leave. Here is the figure that quietly governs everything. In a building in this climate, as much as 80% of all the electricity it draws goes to a single task: pushing heat back out through the walls. Not the lights, not the lifts, not the screens. The cooling. 4/5 of the power spent fighting the sun. Multiply that across a city of millions, and cooling becomes the single largest appetite in the entire machine. And the cruelty of it is in the timing.
The city's thirst and the city's heat peak at exactly the same moment. On the hottest afternoon of the year, the sun drives the cooling load to its absolute maximum. Every chiller in every tower running flat out at once. That same heat pushes the demand for water up with it as the city drinks and sweats and evaporates. And so the two greatest appetites in the machine spike together in the same hour on the same day. The whole system, every plant, every turbine, every line has to be built large enough to meet that single worst moment. Not the average day, the peak. The one afternoon when everything is needed at once. A machine sized for its hardest hour is a machine carrying enormous spare capacity on all the others. That is the price of never failing. You build for the worst day, and you carry the weight of it every day. For years, every building fought the heat alone, each with its own units grinding away on its own roof, each one a small, wasteful furnace running in reverse. Then the city reached for the same instinct that gave it cogeneration. Centralize it. In the newest districts, cold is now a utility, like water and power. A central plant chills water down to a few degrees above freezing and pumps it out through a web of insulated pipes buried beneath the streets. The cold water flows into each tower, soaks up its heat, and returns, warmed, to be chilled and sent out again. A closed loop of cold, running under the city the way blood runs under skin. One plant can cool 100 towers at once, and do it on a fraction of the power 100 separate systems would burn. It is clever, it works, and it deepens the dependency rather than easing it. Because district cooling does not shrink the appetite for power. It only organizes it. The chillers still run on electricity. The electricity still comes from the same gas. And the pipes are full of chilled water. Water that had to be made or recycled from the same strained supply. Cooling leans on power. Power leans on gas. And of everything leaning on that fire, cooling leans the hardest. So now there are two enormous demands riding on the same thin thread. The city must make its water, and it must fight its heat. Both every hour. Both out of the same flame. Stack the hunger for cold on top of the hunger for water, and you start to understand why the gas can never, ever be allowed to stop. There is a second question hiding behind the first. If almost none of the water is local, how much of anything else is? Open a fridge anywhere in this city and look at what is inside. The apples, the rice, the chicken, the milk, the vegetables. Ask one simple question of each of them. Where did you grow? Almost none of it grew here. The land that cannot spare water for crops cannot feed the people who live on it, and so the numbers run the same way as the water. Depending on how you count, somewhere between 85 and 90% of all the food eaten here is imported, carried in from dozens of countries across thousands of kilometers, arriving without pause. And where it all comes from is its own quiet map of dependency. The rice arrives from India. much of the fresh produce from India, from Iran, from Pakistan, from across Europe. Apples, onions, potatoes, citrus, crossing borders and seas to reach a shelf in the desert. The meat comes frozen, from Brazil, from Australia, from wherever the price and the season line up. Dairy from Europe, grain from the great wheat plains of the world. Almost every corner of the planet has a hand in a single Dubai dinner. And there is a strategy hidden in that scatter. By buying from everywhere, the city makes sure it depends on nowhere in particular. If one harvest fails, or one border closes, or one supplier falters, another can be found. The spread itself is a kind of insurance, a deliberate refusal to let any single country hold the city's plate hostage. But spread the suppliers as widely as you like, and one thing never changes. It still all has to arrive, by ship or by plane, without pause. The diversity protects the city from losing any one source. It does nothing to protect it from losing the thing that carries them all. Which raises the obvious question: how does a desert city of millions get fed 3 times a day when the desert itself grows almost nothing? Go back to that same stretch of coast at Jebel Ali. Beside the power and water complex stands its twin in scale, the port. It is the largest man-made harbour in the world. Not the largest in the region, in the world. A harbour that did not exist at all until it was dug out of the coast and the sea was let in. Dozens of berths. Cranes tall enough to lift 4 shipping containers at once. And through it, in a single year, pass millions of those containers. Food among them, stacked frozen and chilled and dry, bound for the shelves of the city behind it. There is a story in how that harbour came to be, and it explains the whole city. 50 years ago, when this was still a modest trading town, its ruler looked at a coastline with no deep water port and decided to build the largest one on Earth. Out in the open desert, far from anything that was there yet. Many thought it reckless. A harbour that size, for a town that small, in a place with no industry to fill it. He built it anyway. Not for the trade the town had, but for the trade he intended it to have. A bet that the future would arrive by sea. The bet paid. Around the port grew a free zone, a vast tax-free industrial city that now generates close to a quarter of the entire Emirates economy on its own. Aluminium is smelted here. Goods are landed, stored, repacked, and shipped back out to a market of billions across the region. The town that once lived off pearls now lives off the movement of everything. But look at what the port really is, underneath the scale. It is the creek again, 500 times larger. A place that makes very little and moves almost everything. A place that survives by importing what the land will not provide. So the food arrives the way the water is made and the cold is pumped, through a single enormous piece of infrastructure that runs without pause. Take the port away and the shelves do not thin slowly over months. In a city that grows almost nothing, they empty in days. Keep that beside the water and the power. 3 great flows now. Water made from the sea, cold pumped through the streets, and food carried across it. 3 appetites, and not one of them fed by the ground the city stands on. There is one more thing this city does with water that almost no visitor ever notices, and it quietly changes how you see everything green. Look at the strips of grass along the highways. the lawns outside the hotels, the date palms lining the boulevards, the parks, the flower beds. In a place with 100 millimetres of rain a year, all of it should be dust. It is not. It is watered every day in the heat by the litre. But not with the water from the sea. That water is far too precious and far too expensive to pour onto a flower bed. The green of Dubai runs on something else. It runs on the water the city has already used once. Every drop that goes down a drain, from a shower, a sink, a kitchen, a bathroom, is collected and carried out to treatment plants on the edge of the desert. There, it is cleaned, stage by stage, filtered, settled, disinfected, until it is clean enough for everything except drinking. Treated sewage. And rather than dump it back into the Gulf, the city sends it out again, through a second, hidden network of pipes, coloured a deep purple so that no one ever confuses the two. Beneath these streets, two water systems run side by side. One carries fresh water in. The other carries the city's used water back out, cleaned, to feed the green. The scale of it is quietly staggering. Recycling that water saves the city hundreds of millions of litres of desalinated water every single day. Water that would otherwise have to be boiled out of the sea just to keep the palms standing. The lush, planted, impossibly green city that seems to defy the desert is not defying it at all. It is running on its own recycled water. Sit with that for a moment, because it reframes the entire place. The oasis is not an oasis. It is a loop. Nothing here is fresh twice. The sea becomes drinking water. Drinking water becomes wastewater. Wastewater becomes the water on the flowers. And even the solids left behind at the very end are dried and turned to fertiliser, spread on the same soil that grows the same green that everyone stops to photograph. The city that looks like pure abundance is, underneath, one of the most closed and careful systems on Earth. Every drop is used, and used again, because there was never very much of it to begin with. Remember the green. When we reach the end, it will mean something different than it does now. All of this leads to a colder question, the one the engineers who run the city think about constantly, even when no one else does. What happens if it stops? Because there is an uncomfortable truth buried inside manufactured water. You cannot store very much of it. A reservoir of drinking water in this heat evaporates or grows stale, or is simply too small to matter against the thirst of millions. A city that makes its water fresh each day holds, at any given moment, only a few days of it in reserve. Turn the plants off and a clock starts running. So the city did something strange and clever and telling all at once. It began pumping its spare water underground. On the days when the plants make more than the city drinks, the surplus is not wasted. It is pushed down into natural aquifers beneath the desert, the same porous rock that once held the brackish water of the old wells. Down there, sealed away from the sun, it cannot evaporate. It waits. A buried reserve, built drop by drop, held for the day the machine falters. The aim is to store enough to supply the whole city for weeks, even for months, if desalination were ever cut off. A strategic reserve of fresh water, hidden in the ground, in a place with almost no fresh water of its own. Think about what that reserve quietly admits. You do not build a months-long emergency store of something unless you are genuinely afraid of losing it. The buried water is a confession written in engineering. It says, plainly, everything above ground depends on a system that could stop. And if it stops, we had better have hidden the water in advance. And notice the irony sitting inside the rock. The city is storing manufactured seawater in the very aquifers that failed it in the first place. The ground that could never give Dubai water has become a vault, but only because Dubai has learned to make its own. The natural groundwater that remains is thin and salty and shrinking, drawn too hard for too long across the region, creeping further toward brine with every year. The land still offers almost nothing. It has simply become a safe for what the sea and the fire provide. The taps have never run dry. And now you are beginning to see the machinery that guarantees it. And how much of that guarantee is a race, run every single day, between what the city drinks and what the plants can boil. Consider now how the people themselves move through all of this. In a climate that forbids walking for half the year, movement is its own engineering problem. And the city solved it the way it solves everything, by
building a system and then depending on it completely. A driverless metro runs the length of the city on an elevated track, its stations sealed and cooled, its carriages sealed and cooled, the walkways that feed it sealed and cooled. Beneath and beside it runs a spine of motorway, 12 and 14 lanes across in places, carrying the cars that most of the city still lives inside. Even the bus shelters are little glass rooms, air-conditioned against the street. You can cross much of Dubai in summer and never once be truly outside. From cooled home to cooled car to cooled office to cooled mall, the heat kept always on the far side of the glass. And every metre of that comfort runs on the same current. The trains draw power, the chilled stations draw power, the tunnels of cool air between the buildings draw power. Movement, like water and cold and food, is one more thing the city cannot do without electricity, which means one more thing it cannot do without the fire at Jebel Ali. Above it all sits the last flow, the air bridge. 2 airports, one of them among the busiest on Earth for international travel, moving not only people, but the most fragile cargo of all, the fresh food that cannot wait for a ship. Flowers, fish, fruit, flown in overnight and on the shelves by morning. What the sea lanes carry in bulk, the air lanes carry in a hurry. 4 flows now, laid one over another. Water, cold, food, and motion. A city that at first glance looks like a monument to wealth is, looked at properly, a monument to logistics. A place where nearly everything that keeps a person alive and comfortable is made somewhere else, or made on the spot from imported fuel and delivered without pause. Pull back far enough, and Dubai stops looking like a city and starts looking like a machine for keeping people alive in a place that should not hold them. And in the middle of that machine, improbably, there is wildlife. Where the creek widens into salt flats near the heart of the city, hemmed in on every side by motorways and towers, there is a wetland. And on it stand thousands of flamingos, pink, long-legged, wading in the shallows within sight of the skyline,
feeding on the tiny life that thrives in the brackish water. They are not a leftover of some wild past the city forgot to pave. The wetland survives because it is managed. The flows that feed it watched and topped up, part of the same plumbing that waters the parks. Even the birds here are on the system. A wild flock thriving in the one stretch of the desert coast that the machine keeps deliberately wet. It is a strange kind of wonder. Life adapting not to a wilderness, but to an infrastructure. The flamingos do not know and do not care that the shallows they feed in are, in part, a decision, a valve left open, a flow maintained. They simply stand in the water, as flamingos have stood for far longer than there has been a city here to watch them. But there is one part of the machine that is not made of steel or water or current. And it is the part that keeps all the rest of it turning. The people. Most of the people who live in this city were not born in this country. The great majority came from somewhere else, carried in, like the food and the fuel, to do the work the city needs done. They pour the concrete, they run the plants, they drive the trucks, they clean the cooled towers and cook in the cooled kitchens and lay the pipe that carries the water. A city that imports almost everything imports its workforce too. And much of that work happens in the very heat the rest of the city is built to escape. On the sites and in the yards, through the summer, in temperatures that push past 50 degrees. The danger is real enough that, by law, outdoor work must stop through the hottest hours of the hottest months. A midday ban, written to keep people from dying in the heat that the towers behind them are engineered to hold out. It is worth saying plainly, the invisible machine that makes the water and pumps the cold and moves the food does not run on its own. It runs on human hands, most of them foreign, many of them working in conditions the finished city is designed to hide. The comfort behind the glass is real. So is the labor that builds and maintains it, out in the heat, on the other side of that glass. Every system this
city depends on, someone keeps running. That too is a dependency, perhaps the deepest one of all. Somewhere behind the coast at Jebel Ali, there is a room most people will never see. It has no windows onto the sea, only screens. Through the night, a handful of operators sit inside it, watching the machine breathe. Not the whole city, just the numbers that describe it. Pressure in the mains, the temperature of the gas turbines, the flow off the desalination lines, the rising demand as the sun climbs and, across 2 million homes, the cooling switches on at once. Their work is balance. Water and power are made together, so they must be watched together. One dial too far in either direction, and the delicate marriage of heat and steam that feeds the city begins to slip. When a single turbine trips in the small hours, they feel it as a shiver across the screens, and they answer it before anyone in the towers stirs, before a single tap upstairs so much as coughs. The city sleeps because they do not. The whole shining surface of it, the fountains, the green, the cold air, the endless water, rests at 3 a.m. on a quiet room full of screens, and the few people awake inside it keeping the fire and the sea in step. And where the great systems do not yet reach, there are still men and trucks. Not every corner of the city is plumbed into the network. Out at the edges, the new villas beyond the last mains, the building sites, the labor camps, the pools. Water still arrives the oldest way, by tanker.
A driver fills a steel belly of fresh water at the plant and hauls it, load by load, to the places the pipes have not yet found. And when the used water needs to leave those same places, another tanker comes for that and carries it out to the treatment works to begin the loop again. It is a strange thing to see in the shadow of the towers, the most advanced water system in the desert, and running right alongside it, a fleet of trucks doing exactly what the water boats did on the creek 100 years ago, carrying water in, carrying water out, by hand, by wheel, load by load. The machine is vast and automatic and precise, and it still leans at its ragged edges on a driver, a tank, and a long, hot road. The oldest method and the newest running side by side, doing the same ancient work, moving water in a place that has none. And still the city reaches further out. Off the coast, it has built land where there was only sea. Great fronded islands of dredged sand, shaped like palm trees, holding homes and hotels on ground that did not exist 30 years ago. The city that manufactures its water also manufactures its coastline. Inland, in windowless warehouses, it has begun to grow food without soil or sun. Vertical farms, stacked trays of green under coloured light, sipping a fraction of the water a field would need, trying to claw back some small share of the harvest from the ships. It is a start. It is nowhere near enough. The fridges still fill from the sea lanes. And on the rare day the sky does break, when one of those brief, violent desert storms drops most of a year's rain in a single afternoon, the city meets the opposite problem. It was built to keep water out, not to carry it away. A place engineered against drought has almost no room for a flood. The water pools on the roads and in the underpasses with nowhere to go, and for a few hours, the driest city on Earth is wading through the very thing it spends every other day manufacturing. Even the rain, when it finally comes, arrives as a stranger. And nowhere is the paradox more open or more deliberate than at the foot of the tallest building on Earth. After dark, a lake at its base erupts. Jets of water thrown high into the desert night, lit and shaped and set to music, watched by thousands. Water as pure spectacle, sprayed into the dry air, some of it lost to evaporation the instant it leaves the nozzle, in one of the driest cities on the planet. A century ago, on the creek, a wasted cup of water was unthinkable. Now the city throws it into the sky for applause. Both of those things are true. Both belong to the same place. The only difference between them is the machine. Before we follow the fuel out to sea, look at what the machine does to the sea it drinks from. Making fresh water from salt water does not make the salt vanish. It concentrates it. For every litre of drinking water boiled out of the Gulf, what is left behind is a smaller body of water, hotter and far saltier than the sea it came from. And that brine goes back, pumped out into the same Gulf the intake pipes draw from. Now think about the Gulf itself. It is shallow. It is almost enclosed, a near landlocked sea, joined to the open ocean only through that one narrow strait. Water that enters it is slow to leave, and all along its shores sit the desalination plants of a dozen thirsty cities, each one drinking fresh water and returning warm brine, year after year, into a basin that barely flushes. The result is a sea growing slowly saltier and warmer than it has any natural right to be. Which means the water drawn in tomorrow is a little harder to purify than the water drawn in today. The machine is quietly changing its own source, thickening the very sea it depends on, making its own work harder with every litre it makes. It is the deepest kind of dependency of all, not on a distant strait or an imported fire, but on a sea that the act of drinking is slowly altering. The city leans on the Gulf, and the more heavily it leans, the more the Gulf leans back. So gather the threads, bring back everything the city cannot live without, and lay it in a line. The water, made from the sea. The cold, pumped through the streets. The food, carried across the water. The movement, running on the grid. 4 flows, holding a civilization upright in a place that should not hold one. And now trace each one back to its source. Not the first source, the last one. The one at the very bottom that everything else stands on. The water is made by boiling the sea. The boiling is done with heat. The heat comes from the turbines. The turbines are spun by burning gas. The cold is made by chillers. The chillers run on electricity. The electricity comes from the turbines, the same turbines burning the same gas. The food is kept frozen and chilled in warehouses and shops and homes, all of it cooled, all of it on the grid, all of it back to the turbines, back to the gas. The trains, the ports, the pumps, the treatment works, the room full of screens. Gas, 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 at the bottom of every single one. Strip the city down to its foundation, and there is only one thing standing there. Not water, not money. Gas. Burning without pause at Jebel Ali and its sister plants along the coast. The city knows the thread it hangs from better than anyone, and it has begun, quietly, to pull at it. Out on a plain south of the city, in a place that gets more sun than almost anywhere on Earth, it is building one of the largest solar parks in the world. Field after field of panels, spreading further every year. The idea is simple and radical. If the sun is the one thing this place has in overwhelming abundance, then let the sun make the power. And let the power one day make the water. Not by burning imported gas, but by pushing seawater through fine membranes with electricity drawn straight from the light. It is the city trying to swap the fire for the sky, to feed the machine at last with something the desert actually owns. But it is not there yet, not close. For all the panels in the sand, the great majority of the city's power, and almost all of the heat that boils its water, still comes from the flame. The sun is rising in the mix year by year. The gas still rules the night. And the night is when the cooling load is heaviest, and the panels are dark. And here is the part that should give anyone pause. The emirate sits on very little natural gas of its own to burn. What its plants consume, it must bring in, piped from its neighbours and carried from further out across the Gulf. The fire that makes the water is fed in large part by fuel that arrives from somewhere else, like the food, like the workforce, like almost everything. Even the flame at the bottom of the machine is imported. Follow that fuel to its door, and you arrive at a single, narrow place on the map. Almost all of the gas and oil that moves out of this whole region by sea passes through one strait, a channel between the Gulf and the open ocean that, at its tightest, is only a few dozen kilometers wide. Every tanker, in and out, threads the same needle. It has always been narrow. It was narrow when there was nothing here but pearl boats. It is narrow now, with a city of millions breathing through it. Sit with the shape of that. A civilization of towers and fountains and cold air and endless water. And the fuel that makes all of it possible arrives, in the end, through a gap in the map you could cross in a single afternoon. This is the thread the whole city hangs from. Not the sand, not the sun, not even the sea, which gives its water freely. The single most fragile point in the entire machine is a narrow lane of water far offshore that the city does not control and cannot replace. Imagine, just once, that the fire goes quiet. Not forever, only for a while. And watch the order in which a city like this comes undone. The first thing to fail is not the water, it is the cold. The cooling load leans on the grid harder than anything else, so it is the first to feel a shortfall. The chillers falter. The chilled water in the buried pipes begins to warm. And within hours, in the summer, the sealed glass towers that cannot open a single window start to heat from the inside. Slowly at first, and then not slowly at all. Then the cold chain. The frozen and chilled food, almost all of it imported, none of it grown near enough to replace in a hurry, sits in warehouses and shops and homes that are no longer cold. What cannot be kept spoils. In a city that holds only days of food and grows almost none of it, that clock is short. And then, last, the water. As the turbines wind down, the heat that boils the sea fades with them. The desalination lines slow. The buried reserve begins to pour up out of the aquifers to cover the gap. The weeks of water the city so carefully hid underground, spending down, drop by drop, against a fire that has not come back on. And the green goes with it. The recycled water that keeps the palms and the parks alive comes from a city that is still using water. And a city winding down uses less, and treats less, and pumps less out through the purple pipes. So the green begins to brown. The oasis, which was only ever a loop, stops looping. And the desert, which was never really gone, begins, quietly, to come back. That is the cascade. Cold, then food, then water, then green. Each one a system that seemed separate, each one revealed in failure to have been the same system all along. Pull the one thread at the bottom, and the whole fabric comes away in your hands. Not because any single part was weak, because every part was holding up every other. This is what interdependence really means. Not that the systems are connected, that they are, underneath, one system, with a single, distant, narrow point of failure, out on the water, that no one in the towers can see. Now put back the sentence from the very beginning, the one left in your pocket. In this city, the water is the electricity. They are one machine, wearing two faces. Which means the chain, laid out in full, reads like this. The strait feeds the ships. The ships feed the gas. The gas feeds the fire. The fire makes the electricity. The electricity boils the sea. The boiling makes the water. And the water fills every tap in every tower for millions of people who have never once seen any part of it happen. Break that first link and the taps run dry with the Gulf in plain sight. Not because the sea ran out. The sea is right there, endless and warm, lapping at the intake pipes. The taps run dry because in Dubai, you cannot drink the sea. You can only drink the electricity that turns the sea into water. And the electricity is a flame, fed by a ship, threading a strait somewhere over the horizon. That is the answer to the question we began with. How does a city survive without rain? It does not survive by finding water. There is no water here to find. It survives by manufacturing it. And it manufactures water by manufacturing power. And it manufactures power out of fuel it does not have. Carried across a sea it does not command. Through a strait it cannot widen. We call Dubai a miracle of ambition, a monument to what money can build in a desert. But that is not quite what it is. It is a miracle of logistics, a monument to the chain, to the ships that never stop, the fire that never cools, the operators who never sleep, and the 1,000 quiet dependencies, each one holding up the next. It should not hold together. By every instinct, a city like this, no water, no fuel, no food of its own, hung on a fire fed through the eye of a needle, should be impossible. And yet, right now, tonight, it is standing. The fountains are dancing, the towers are cold, the water is running. The whole improbable machine is turning over in the dark, exactly as it was designed to. That is the real wonder of the place. Not that it is rich, that it works at all. So step back one last time and look at the whole of it. Not the towers, not the fountains, the machine underneath. A city of millions on a coast that gives no fresh water, in a climate that would kill an unsheltered body in a single afternoon. Eating food it does not grow, burning fuel it does not have, drinking a sea it must boil, cooling itself against a sun that never relents. Every one of those problems solved. Every one of those solutions leaning on the next. And all of it, in the end, resting on a fire fed through a narrow strait far out on the water that the city cannot see and cannot widen. Think back to the green. When we began, it looked like abundance, proof that money had beaten the desert, that here, at last, someone had made the sand bloom. You know now what it really is. Not abundance, a loop. Recycled water on borrowed soil, kept turning by a machine that never rests. The lush and planted city was never an oasis. It was an oasis-shaped answer to a question the desert never stops asking. And the answer holds only as long as the machine does. Think back too to the creek, to the pearl divers and the water boats, to a people who measured water by the barrel and thought a wasted cup a small kind of sin. Everything has changed since then. The town is a metropolis. The barrels are pipelines. The boats are the largest harbour on Earth. And yet, underneath, almost nothing has changed at all. This is still a place that makes very little, and imports almost everything, and survives, as it always has, by the movement of things across the water. That is the truth the fountains hide. Dubai is not a triumph over the desert. It is a truce with it, renewed every single day by a machine that must not stop, tended by people who must not sleep, fed through a strait that must not close. Nothing here works alone. Remove one part and the whole thing stops. That is not a weakness the city stumbled into. It is the bargain it was built on. And there is one last thought to carry away from this coast. Dubai is only the clearest example. The extreme, drawn in glass and neon in the middle of the desert so that no one can miss it. But it is not the only city living this way. More and more places all over the world now run on machines their people never see. Water made far away, power drawn from somewhere else, food that travels further than the people who eat it. Dubai simply cannot hide it. There is no river here to pretend with, no rain to thank, no soil to point to. The dependency is naked here, written in steam along the shore. Everywhere else, it is only better disguised, which makes this desert city a kind of mirror. Look closely at how it survives, and you are looking at how a great deal of the modern world survives. On long, quiet chains it has stopped noticing, holding up lives it has come to take for granted. No one knows how long the bargain holds. The sun is rising in the mix, slowly, panel by panel. The sea is thickening, slowly, litre by litre. The strait stays as narrow as it has always been. And somewhere tonight, in a room full of screens, a handful of people keep the fire and the sea in step, so that a city can go on drinking water it made from the ocean in a desert where it does not rain. It should not hold together, and yet tonight it does. Thanks for watching. If you want to keep looking beneath the surface of the places that shape our world, how they really work, and what they really rest on, subscribe and stay with us. Until the next journey.